I will start the recording for this presentation. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here and welcome to the secret to classroom engagement. Everyone has a voice. Please let me know if you cannot hear me or if you cannot see the presentation that I'm sharing right now. You can unmute yourself and say something, or you could type in a chat box. So one thing that we want our graduate to be able to do is communicate well. And to learn to communicate well, in addition to interacting with the course content material, students need to interact with one another and with the instructor. Studies show that instructional approaches that use student interaction are most likely to enhance student learning, especially in a diverse classroom. So I know many faculty member, instructor, myself included, we use many instructional approaches to encourage student participation and interaction throughout through discussion, Q&A session, presentation, writing, and problem solving. And today we will explore some evidence-based strategy to support equitable classroom participation and engagement. And I put the citation for this presentation in the reference slide at the end of the presentation, and I will send all attendees a copy of the slide after the workshop for your reference. So my name is Lynn Nguyen. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I taught chemistry at NIU since 2016, both at the undergraduate and graduate levels. And last year in June, I joined the Center for Innovative Teaching and Learning as an inclusive teaching coordinator. Although new to the professional development field, I have over a decade of teaching experience in higher education at various private and public institutions. And I'm excited to have you here with me to discuss fostering equitable classroom engagement and communication skill for our students and better prepare them for a diverse workplace. So thank you all for being here. So next, since we're going to spend the next 60 minutes or so together, let's find out how diverse we are in terms of your disciplines and expertise. So please tell us your discipline, what you hope to get out of this workshop. Feel free to unmute and introduce yourself, or you can type your response in the chat. I budget a few minutes for us to do this, so let's get to know each other. See, we have 8 participants, including myself. You could raise your hand, you could type it in the chat. Hi, Michelle. Michelle, so are you teaching mostly online or in person or hybrid?
I'm actually teaching mostly in person, although I have COVID this week, so I'm actually at home teaching from home. But most of my classes are in person.
I see. Thank you for sharing that. And then we have Michelle K. Welcome, in person and online. Yes. So in the follow-up email, I will send you a resource come out of Center for Innovative Teaching and Learning specifically for online classroom environment, so that if you're teaching online or if you have COVID and have to move your class online for a week or two, you have some resources there as well. Hi, Sarah, historian. I see. Yeah, it's there's the participation. I'm so glad that you noticed that it's uneven in classes. It's happened in many classes, myself included. Hi, Ralph. Full disclosure, with my husband, I used to teach chemistry. So welcome here. Hi, Ellen, accountant, and then art historian. Thank you so much, everyone, for sharing your expertise and discipline. I'm very pleased to see that we have faculty from diverse field here. So later on, I would love for you to share how you help our students engage and participate in your classes. So a truly balanced class engagement strategy promotes equity and inclusion and excellence. And we do that by amplifying the voices of all students rather than just a few outspoken ones, right? So of course that doesn't happen by chance. It takes intention, preparation to cultivate equitable interaction and promote active learning. And that's why you're here, because you want to see how can I do better. So thank you so much for that. The goal of the workshop today is for you to be able to do these 4 things. Develop norms or guidelines for classroom participation, construct equitable ways to call on your student. And then if you nurture voices that were historically silent in higher education. And then the last thing is, do you grade participation? And if you do, how can you equitably assess student participation and engagement? Because it's critical to make sure that we fully aware of what do we want our grade to represent, so that we actually grade student achieve student knowledge and content and skills, and instead of student compliance. So that's something that we're going to discuss. Equitable grading is another core workshop that we offer as Center for Innovative Teaching and Learning. So if you're interested in how to equitably assess student learning, or in this case, student engagement and participation, please keep a lookout for the upcoming workshop from CIDO. So learning objective number 1, develop norm for participation. So if you going to encourage your student to participate in your class, have you considered co-generate guidelines with your student? So this allows students to take part in establishing the type of participation they wish to see in their classroom. And it's also make it easier for you to reinforce the norms and remind students that they help you create it and they agree to these classroom policy. So depending on what course you teach, what are considered norm can be relatively different, right? So I teach chemistry. It's hardcore science. We don't discuss or learn about opinions. Our content is driven by evidence-based knowledge. So one of the norms that I work very hard to establish in my general chemistry classroom is to normalize being wrong. I keep telling my students it's okay to make mistake. It's a normal to make mistake. That is how we learn. So usually at the beginning of the semester and at the beginning of the class, I would introduce the learning objective for the day. I often ask questions to evaluate the student prior knowledge of the objective. And if they gave me a wrong response, we actually have a little celebration. I would say something like, excellent, we are going to learn something new today. Because I tell them, if you already know the answer to that question, you probably shouldn't be here. You should be in upper division classes. So that's helped students a lot. That helped them feel like they could speak up, they could participate. If they wrong, that means they're going to learn something. So I find that very helpful for my large classroom. Same idea when it comes to homework. I give my student unlimited attempt on their homework so that they can correct their initial responses and learn from their mistake. And I do that with the assistance of some of the program online homework software that allow me to set that up. And then it takes bravery for anyone to raise their hands, to ask a question, whether it's for clarification or to answer a question about a complex concept. As an instructor, I always acknowledge and thank students who ask questions for clarification, for more explanation, and or more example of how to solve an analytical problem. So I taught large enrollment classes up to 200 students per section, and it's critical for me as an instructor to establish expectation for being on time. How do I allow them to use technology? How would I like them to use technology? And then I have policy on holding side conversation at the beginning of the semester. I try to establish all of these norms. So consider establishing your norms and share the norm and your rationale for those norms or rule with your class during the first week of class, or maybe the first day of class. And consider having students sign a code of conduct stating that have read and understood the expectation for your class, and they will honor it. I do this for the general chemistry lab. The student have to sign a code of conduct for safety reason. And it's turned out to be very helpful when we have TA trying to reinforce the code, and then we have the sign form to back it up. So yeah, I like to hear from you. What are some basic norms that you use in your class? How do your students respond to these norms? And then after that, I want to challenge you to think a little bit deeper. We know that student racial and gender identity and background, all of their positionality can influence the extent to which they participate in class. So do you create a brave space? Not just safe, but brave, and open environment to have difficult conversation that's essential for growth and empowering for academic achievement? Do you nurture voices that challenge the dominant narrative? And do you encourage students to question and challenge the not dominant narrative? So Michelle say, we're starting to do this in SEED with our early childhood program, the Code of Conduct Commitment. Thank you for starting that. Okay, so let's see. My struggle is that some of my students don't know what norms to suggest or don't feel comfortable sharing these the first day of class. How do you introduce norms? So I think what you doing here is great because it sounded like you have some idea, of code of conduct, right? So you present a sample, which is a starter. So student can, you can ask student, what do you think about these norms? What do you think about these things? Have them reflect on the norm that you or your department have, and ask them to contribute based on what you already prepare. Michelle, do you mind, did you already have a sample of norm that you present to your student?
So I think mine are more like certain expectations.
Okay.
And so I delineate between the things that like I expect in terms of like making sure there's respect maintained in the classroom, right? Those are like my minimums that I'm asking them to commit to, and they align with some of the dispositions that we have in our department that we want our students to develop. But the norms in a classroom, I think, could be different for every class, right? Based on the needs of our students. And I think that's a really hard thing for some of our students to understand, like, or feel comfortable if I'm still developing a relationship with them, for them to say like, oh, I need this, or oh, I want this, or so I have that struggle a little bit.
I see. Is your class a large class size or smaller?
Usually it's about 40.
40. I see. So yeah, like you say, these are something that that's have to be very fluid, depend on the classes that you teach and depend on the group of students. But I think some of the basic norm can be very basic. Like if I'm gonna have student do group work in the very first day of class, well, it's not really group work. It's more like think, peer, share. I would have my student just like turn around, talk to the student who sit next to you, because I want them to establish some sort of relationship and connection. And because throughout the semester, I'm going to have them to turn around and work with your partner who's sitting next to you. And I did that because the classroom I had is Verde 143, which is very rigid. It's really hard to do group work and active learning. So Think Pair Share was the best one. So I would encourage and challenge you, Michelle, to continue to think of different ways, depend on your class and your classroom and the number of students that you have, and continue to develop your norms. Sarah say that you challenge the dominant narrative. Do you mind sharing and elaborating a little bit more on how some students can't get on board with that?
Yeah, I challenge racism, and I actually had an experience this semester where a student brought it up just before I was going to do that, and the class had a very lively discussion. So I almost feel like they just don't trust me to introduce this kind of material. I teach a lot of Black artists, Hispanic artists, queer artists, trans artists, and they seem resistant. And the other thing I found is that they're cynical about things. They're very cynical about land acknowledgements, for instance. They really think that we're doing something primitive. So I'm just wondering if they think paying attention to racism and sexism is also performative. This feels very complicated to me.
Yes.
Very complicated.
Yeah, I can see that happen. I can see how challenging it is for you, but I applaud you for trying. And I identify myself as first generation immigrant, first generation going to college, and a woman of color, a woman in STEM field. So all sort of minority identity. But then in the classroom, when I show the work from Black chemists, I still get some vibe of resistance, and I feel awkward because I want my classroom to be a space where everybody feel included. And so I understand the feeling, but at the same time, I think you're doing the right thing. And I think that you have to emphasize with your student that my classroom is not just a safe place. It has to be a brave space. You have to be brave. And a lot of the time, growth is very uncomfortable. It can be painful. And so it feels like you're doing the right thing and going through the growing process. And I hope some of these things that we're going to talk later today going to provide you some insights. Okay, all right. So Ralph, you have a set of sheet describing norms, and how do the student take that? Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
I think they react pretty positively. I occasionally will have a student who is very reluctant to participate in group work. By the end of the semester, they usually all participate. And really, what I describe on my handout is elements of what I think are common courtesy. You don't interrupt somebody when they're participating. You respond respectfully if you disagree. And so I think it's viewed pretty positively, and I have minimal issues. A bigger issue for me is stimulating questions and classroom conversations. It usually takes at least halfway through the semester before students seem to trust me enough to open up and ask questions. So I like your idea of celebrating mistakes. And
Yeah.
I need to do that more often, quite frankly.
There's plenty of example in our field of chemistry, right? There's so many mistakes that turn out to be a great discovery. So if you just like in the first day of class, show some of those mistakes that turn into great discovery and send a message that this is how we learn.
Yeah.
That would be great. And then Michelle, thank you, Ralph. Michelle say that having peers could work. Yeah. Many of the classroom is not very well thought design. It's old, right? So it's not designed for group work, but you can always try to do a pair. And from my experience, I have students who come back to me and say that thank you for making us talk to each other on the first day of class, because they say that they develop into like the career long, the 4 years that they at NIU, they become friends. So they were glad that I make them talk to each other. So yeah, I want to share that. So here are some of the norms that challenge the dominant narrative that I want to bring to your attention. And one thing is, so if you want to have successful small group discussion with equitable student participation, invite students to think about they usually participate or talk during class discussion, and then make conscious effort to be mindful of others. For example, if an individual usually talk, take a step back and listen. Or myself, I usually tell students that I don't like to talk because English is my second language. So throughout my undergraduate years, I knew the answer, but I never raised my hand and talk because I don't want to sound funny. I don't want people to laugh at me or didn't understand what I was saying. So I have to be mindful of that. And sometimes I have to intentionally encourage myself to raise hand and participate. So you can share from your own perspective. I find that very helpful to encourage students to think about it, form their perspective when you open up and share yours. So you could ask students to be aware of how gender, cultural background, socioeconomic status, and life experience could affect their classmate participation. Encourage your students to assume that their classmates are doing their best and want everybody in the class to succeed. However, students must acknowledge the negative impact of individual words and behavior can have on the class and on other people. And for you as a professor, you need to address the behavior as they arise. So it's very critical to understand the difference between intent and impact. You can have really good intention, but the fact that what you did or say have a negative impact on somebody else need to be acknowledged as well. So these are something that I hope you keep in mind when you think about norm that challenge the dominant narrative. So learning objective number 2. So how do we construct equitable way to call on student? It's essential to manage who's speaking when and who is taking turn in our classroom, right? We don't want the few loudest or most confident voices to continue to choose when they speak and inadvertently silence the more quiet voices. At the same time, we need to be mindful and not silent. Yeah. Is there a question? Okay. So at the same time, we want to be mindful and not silent the one who are engaged and passionate about topics, right? So what do you consider when you're constructing practical and equitable way to call your student? I teach large classroom, so I have to use cold calling. That means just randomly call on student. It's an effective way to encourage participation from less vocal student. It can also be an excellent way to bring students who otherwise wouldn't volunteer into the discussion, but it's have to be done carefully. So at the beginning of the semester, I warn my student that I would call on them randomly, that I would use cold calling. So everyone need to pay attention and everyone need to be prepared to be on the spot. And I'm very intentional about making sure that I call on people in equitable ways. So I'm prepared to deal with the awkward silence. I wait for a minute or so after asking the question. One of the simplest teaching strategy is to increase time for students to think and to expand the number of students participating verbally is to lengthen the wait time after posing a question. An increase in time allow critical neural processing time for students and prepare, perhaps also allow more introverted student time to rally the courage to volunteer and answer. That's my case as a student. I'm introverted, so the wait time and awkward silence, sometimes I just like, okay, fine, I speak and I raise my hand. So in reality, extending wait time can be challenging. Sometimes I actively mentally count 1001, 1002. So I do that before acknowledging potential student responses. And then sometimes I would invite, sometimes wait time may not be enough to give time to students to gather thought and muster the confidence to share the thoughts. Many students may need more scaffolding, so more instruction and guidance about how to use the time they have been given to think. So one simple way is to require students to write down 1 or 2 ideas that would capture their initial thought, right? So first thing I wait, and then I say, you know what, write down 1 thing or 2 things about this problem and how to answer the question. So this act of writing may even lead students to discover points of confusion or key insights. And in addition, if you have a smaller classroom and you want to collect this writing can hold students accountable in thinking and recording their ideas. So, yep, perfect. You can ask a question and have everyone think about it and write down an answer before explaining. That's perfect. That's where you can encourage introverted students to participate. That way you can encourage students whose English is their second language to participate because they get to write down instead of verbally saying things. So excellent. Let's see where we are. So I love think, pair, share. So I think if you integrating 1 or more think, pair, share opportunity during a class session, it's had the potential to cultivate classroom equity in multiple ways, providing individual student time to verbalize their thoughts about a concept, promoting comparison of ideas among classmates, and transforming the nature of the classroom environment to be more participatory and promoting a collaborative rather than competitive culture in your classroom. In my case, it's undergraduate science classes. So
Lynn, I came in late. Could you elaborate on this think, pair, share model, exactly what it is that you do? I may have missed that.
So in the beginning of the semester, during the first class, after I go through a few things, housekeeping, norm, I would stop and I would force the student to turn and talk to the person who sit next to you. And so in Faraday 143, it's like a stage. It's really hard to move, but they can turn to the person next to them and talk. I give them a good 5 minutes and you can hear the room just suddenly get so loud and noisy and people talking and exchange contact information. So I set the stakes in the first day of class so that throughout the semester, when I pause and have a worksheet, I would tell students to work in pair. So that's how I did it in the general chemistry classroom. But in a discussion-based classes, I can see that you have a prompt, some question, and then you can have the student write down a few thoughts and then turn to the neighbor and discuss and compare their ideas before you bring everyone back to as a whole class and ask for a response. So it's literally think, pair, share. Just have a pair of students work together and share
Thank you.
idea.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So let's see. So increasing wait time, allowing right time, utilizing think, pair, share can also be helpful in ensuring that you have an equitable distribution of calls across gender and racial identities, right? If there are 3 male hands up, I would wait a little bit to see if any woman hand go up and I call on her, or I try not to call on the student who always vocal because they the confidence one. So when you using a variety of different ways to encourage student participation, we ensure that the class has an equitable way for every voices to be heard. So next, I'm gonna have you share, how do you call on your student? Do you have diverse student? How do you call on diverse student? Please share one of the teaching moment that you had in a classroom when you have really good class engagement, and or the most awkward teaching moment when something didn't go right. Yes, I think, Michelle, that's great. So you can say, I really appreciate it, right? Do you want to tell us how you do it? I think it's a great idea to be upfront and straightforward, but at the same time, you don't want to hurt the student feeling, right? So how do you do it?
I find that generally the vocal ones are usually there early. They talk to you, they engage with you, and you usually develop a rapport with them pretty early on in the semester. So it's kind of easy. Like I have like one student, they always usually sit in front. They're always raising their hand. I'll just, be like, hey, wait, we're going to give someone else a chance. And then you could pop in or, something like that. And yet they're very understanding because they want to
Yes.
participate. They're participators and they love it. My class sizes are usually like 35 or so smaller, so easier to do than in a larger situation. But yeah, generally they're not offended at all because
Yes.
they're just really enthusiastic people. I find.
Yeah, I think they actually probably appreciate that, right? Rather than you just call on somebody else and not communicating with them that, you know what, I see you, I hear you, I appreciate you, but let's give other people a chance to. So I'm so glad you're doing that. It's
Yeah.
one of the great practice. Yeah.
Yeah, if they come early, you can kind of give them a cue in also, like, hey, I need to hear from some other people. I know you know your stuff. You're doing great in the class, because they're usually there with questions too, and they usually they're most likely very good students or very conscientious of what they're doing. So giving them just a heads up that I know you know the answer, but it's not that I'm ignoring you, but. So.
Yeah. And I'm going to practice what I was saying here too, right? So I'm going to ask some other people who have not spoken, if you would like to share, how do you have you tried any of these practices that I list, like random call, wait time, think time, write time, and then turn to your neighbor and share your ideas? Have anyone try any of those, and how did it work out in your class?
Hi.
Hi.
I have actually tried all of them. And usually each group of students I found out is kind of different. And for random calls, as you rightly said, I usually alert them from the first day of class. I kind of make it jokingly say, I know you don't like it when I just call on you on the spot, but trust me, we are going to be friends after the class. But for now, let's just pretend like we are not friends. So my goal is to help you pass my class, and when you pass, we are going to become friends. You forgive me, I believe.
Yeah.
So I just said
it's
this
great.
like that before I call them.
Yeah. So I'm glad, and thank you so much, Maria, for sharing what you've done. And I think many of us try everything, and then sometimes things work, and sometimes it doesn't work as we had hoped. But we continue to try, and we continue to grow and do better. But I know random call is can be scary, but you already warn them in the beginning of the class, the first week or the first class, that you're going to be doing it, and you do it for a purpose, and you share the reason why you choose this method of class engagement. I think being upfront and forward with student like you've done is an excellent way to ensure it's equitable and excellent class participation.
Yeah, so just to chip in, something I've also tried, which I think it worked, but I didn't kind of keep up with it, is like I told them, okay, in place of randomly calling you each class day, I'm going to designate some people. Like we come to class, I'll say, okay, 3 of you are going to be the champions for the day, so I'll call on you.
Perfect.
So
Yeah.
kind of I alert them before so that they pay closer attention that I'm going to call on you to tell me an answer or something like that.
Mhm.
So I tried it, but I didn't kind of consistently, because sometimes I designate some people and then I come that day they didn't attend,
I
and
see.
it's difficult to keep up with that.
Yeah. Well, it's a brilliant idea. I haven't tried that, but I like it. Thank you for sharing that. Dr. Stewart say you can go down the road, tell them that when no one responds, you call on next person. That way they don't think you're being unfair or targeting someone. Yes, yes, you can absolutely do that. Michelle K say, I have a group do peer review with another group for group project. They have a common assignment, then they discuss, present back to the class. Yes, that's great. I wonder, do you grade the peer review?
Not usually. Not usually. It's just more for the other team. Like sometimes they'll have like different client companies or even just different research. If it's marketing research, they have different research questions. So it's just like to give each other, insights into what each group is doing, and they just, and then the rest of the class picks up. There's just like 8 groups, so you have like 4 different groups presenting, and they really like to talk to each other.
Mhm.
And they'll ask each other questions that they won't ask me, or it'll come up, and then you can use it as examples, like, oh, that's a great question, who else
Yeah.
is finding that? So I don't usually grade them. Sometimes I do, like if they have to watch presentations, they have to do like a participation. They fill it out when we do final presentations, and I'll give them just credit if they give good feedback, like 0, 5, 10, what I mean, if they do that. So it's not so much where you're looking at every single thing, but just if they're paying attention.
Yep, that's so perfect. You all doing great for our student, and I'm very happy to hear all of that. I'm learning from you, and we'll update the presentation to reflect my learning. Michelle saying, say peer review is to hopefully build a capacity to provide feedback that is appropriate. Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. So let's get back to our learning objective number 3, nurture voices that challenge the dominant narrative. And this is difficult, this is challenging for myself, and I'm sure you can share a story of how it can be challenging for you in your classroom as well. So pay attention to this question of whose voices are we hearing during class and whose voices aren't we hearing, right? And if you think there are voices that we haven't heard from or perspective that we haven't heard from, then do you prioritize making more time to allow space for those voices and those perspectives? And with that said, I encourage you to cultivate brave spaces instead of just safe spaces in your classroom, particularly if you're teaching like social justice education topic, right? So that switch of mindset, being brave rather than being safe, allows students to reflect on their identities and how those identity converge or conflict with the course content. So the way we look, the experience we have, the choices we make, all of that shape us into who we are today, as educators, as lifelong learner. So who are we who are we influencing the way we see our student, especially the one who are different than us. So the way we teach, the way we motivate, the way we encourage our student to participate and ultimately to learn, all of that depend on who we are and what we bring into the classroom. So I hope you consider ways you can elevate historically marginalized voices in higher education and in society. When I pay attention to how much space someone is taking up during class, I'm also thinking about how much space that person take up at this institution and in the world. And I'm trying to get my students to think about that as well. So for example, if I have students who represent underrepresented group taking more time because they're sharing experience from that group, or they're trying to raise up the voices of that group, I'm more likely to just let that go on, even if it look unequally in sense of equal time. So if you have a smaller classroom and you can know your student individually, you can best meet their participation needs. Consider, instead of penalizing students who disengage during class, instead talk to them outside of class and find out what is preventing them from participating in class. And I know you can only do this to some extent, right? If you have 200 students in a classroom, it's virtually impossible to do this, but do what you can. And then to get students comfortable speaking in larger groups, you might choose to start the conversation in smaller group first. And that would provide a safe environment for students to gain comfort and confidence while testing out their ideas with their peer. So small group discussion and small group activity can encourage the quieter student to become more involved, and multiple voices may be empowered simultaneously. I encourage you to be clear about the outcome you expect from small group work for the time frame allotted. So tell students upfront what you expect they will do within their group and where you pick up from, and when you bring the conversation back together. So I'm an introvert. It's not likely that I raise my hand and answer a question in a large group, but in small group, if they say, okay, let's get in group of 3 or 4 people, then I will most likely will speak up and share. So that's something that from my own experience that I find very useful for introverts and for a student who English is the second language. A student like me, we tend to speak up in smaller group than in the big group. So I also have CIDO, Center for Innovative Teaching and Learning, also offer a workshop on inclusive collaborative group assignment. So if you interested, you can look out for our upcoming workshop and attend that workshop to learn more about how to construct high quality group assignment that foster learning among diverse identities. So your turn. How do you nurture diverse voices and how did it go in your class? If you're comfortable, please share with our group how you nurture diverse voices and or voices that challenge the dominant narrative. And how do these practices that you use provide positive impact on women, underrepresented minority, in terms of achievement and attitude in your field, your discipline?
I ask students to share their pronouns when they're introducing each other. I share mine. But working on the principle that it shouldn't be up to trans students to be the only ones who share their pronouns. Like we should kind of normalize it. I also talk about being neurodivergent, and I've had students come up to me and say, thank you for talking about that. I feel really safe. So I think that's important.
Thank you so much, Sarah. If we're in person, I'll probably give you a hug. Thank you so much for sharing your pronouns. I mean, it look like it's so small, right? So little, but it means so much to our student. Like when you share it, you suddenly they say, oh, I'm safe here. I'm safe with this professor. They understand me, they see me. So thank you so much for doing that. Michelle, please. Michelle, did you have your hand raised?
I did. Sorry about that.
Okay.
You know, in our section, our field, in education, especially early education, because I focus on birth to 5, we actually have the reverse of where we have I'm dominated by having females in my classes, and I have rarely have males in my class. But when I do, I make sure that it's those individuals that I have to make sure that I am giving them opportunity to share and what they're thinking, what they're feeling, especially when, like for our instance, last week in my infants tots classroom, we talked a lot about pregnancy and we focus a lot on the mom, obviously, and like the impacts that her health and her mental health can have on the development of a child, but like making sure that I'm also spending some time talking about fathers and their roles as well to make sure that it's important for me to kind of recognize the perspectives that they have as well. So I try to make sure that I balance that out a little bit and make sure that they're an equal part of the conversation.
Yes, thank you, Michelle, for sharing that perspective. Our children go to the NIU Child Development and Family Center, and we thrill every time we have a female practicum student. It has rarely happened, but I think it's very good for our children to be exposed to caregiver in a variety of diversity, right? And so I thank you for make sure that we encourage our male students to continue to pursue what their heart desire and make
Lynn,
it
you
a
said we're
safe.
thrilled every time they get a female caretaker. I think you meant male.
I meant male, yeah. I'm sorry. But yeah, thank you for nurturing those male voices in your class and your field because they are underrepresented minority in that field. So thank you. All right, so one last thing that I want to touch base today is how do we equitably assess student participation? So do you grade student participation? What do you want that grade, the participation grade to represent? You want it to represent the student achieve of knowledge, content, skill, or does a grade represent something else? So it's very important for us to be mindful of potential biases when we do grade student participation. Some students might find that it difficult or uncomfortable to maintain eye contact, to speak up, or take notes during class. There's a whole host of reasons why students may or may not engage or participate during class. If you use some of the technique we discussed earlier, many studies show that those practices can help with increasing student participation. And then if you teach a seminar class or discussion-based class and feel like grading participation is a necessity, please consider aligning your assessment of participation with the learning objective and grade by the learning objective. This involves assessing whether students acquire the course objective rather than student compliance. Please be intentional about grading. Tell students why you want them to engage and participate, and how actively engage with the course material through class participation will help them acquire and retain the knowledge and the skill necessary for their career. Sometimes they don't know. So many of you have shared here that you very straightforward and tell your student why you do what you do. I think it's a great practice in helping students understand why we ask them to do certain things. There's a benefit, there's a purpose to that. Can you make participation grade a formative assessment? Like give them feedback instead of giving a hard like 60% grade or 70%. So just consider if it can be a formative assessment or make it a part of a final paper or final presentation. It's kind of scaffolding the participation grade into a final paper or a final presentation. Other thing to consider, can you employ expansive feedback strategy other than grading? So effective communication, providing timely feedback that promote growth, developing grading rubric are some of the idea to consider when you develop your equity grading practices. In this case, grading practices for participation. And once again, CITL offer a separate workshop on equitable grading. And you can look up and see when that coming out if you want to learn more about how to equitably assess our student learning. So now I want to pause and reflect. I want you to please read and reflect on what we just discussed together here, right? What are some changes that you like to make with your participation practices or policy? And now we're gonna practice some of the things that we just say. If you have your paper and pen or your computer nearby, please take a few minutes and write down one or two thoughts, reflection on what we discussed today. And I will practice wait time and I will wait. I will be quiet for the next minute or two. And after that, I will ask if anybody here is comfortable sharing your reflection with the whole group. And I would really appreciate if you share. And I appreciate if you wrote a reflection for yourself and for yourself alone, and you don't have to share. That's fine too. So I'm practice wait time and be quiet now. Okay, so Ralph wrote, I can incorporate celebrating mistake more using mid-semester formative. assessment for group work, start conversation in smaller group. Lot of good tips that together can make a significant difference in my classroom environment. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you, Sarah. And Michelle, I'm going to plan on having students discuss potential norm in pairs initially to help ensure all as a part of the creation of these. Perfect. I'm going to make sure to look for opportunity to challenge the dominant narrative because I'm not sure I've identified opportunity for this. Yeah. I would love to hear more about that when you discover and start actively looking for opportunity when you can challenge the dominant narrative. So, like I say, thank you for sharing. And if you just write a reflection for yourself and don't want to share, that's fine too. If you want to unmute and say something, thank you, Ralph. Okay. All right. So, it's almost time to move through thing pretty quickly here. So these are the research study that I get the information for the presentation form. I will share this with you in a follow-up email that I will send after this. And once again, thank you so much for participating. Thank you for being here. Thank you for doing everything that you can to make sure that our students success. And thank you for joining me. My name is Lynn Nguyen, pronouns she, her, hers. I am an inclusive teaching coordinator at Center for Innovative Teaching and Learning. And I'm so happy that you shared your time with me today. Everybody, please enjoy the rest of your day. And hopefully I see you some other time.